It's been a long 17 months. We're down to 14 days to go in this debate and election cycle, and we are out there working it hard, just as hard as we did on day one. I've wrapped up 40,000 miles the other day on vehicles, and I think we've more than hit all 14 counties more than twice now. So we've been out there amongst the voters, talking to them and working on these things. But I entered this race because it was time for a change in 13th District. We've seen some pretty nasty races, and of course some of them that rank #1 in the country. But we need some civil debate and discussion of what's going on and the issues that affect us here in Illinois and throughout the country. Being experienced with the county board and what's going on with nonprofit I oversee and how government affects daily lives of everybody when it comes to healthcare and that we need change. And I'm hoping we'll see a difference between myself and Rodney tonight, and looking forward to getting through this and moving on. And thank you.
Thank you. And now a 90-second opening statement from the Republican incumbent in the 13th District, Congressman Rodney Davis.
Well, thank you, Jim and Bernie and everyone for coming out tonight. And thanks to the SJR for hosting this evening. And thank you, Mark, for being here once again. And it has been a great opportunity for us to get together. We've shown the American people what it's like to have a civil debate over the issues that are important, where we agree and where we disagree on, and where we see America going and what our priorities are. You know, I ran for this office less than 4 years ago. I stood in Springfield debating my opponents each and every time that I've run for election or re-election. And I talked about what I wanted to do in Washington, and I'm happy to say that we've accomplished a great deal of those promises that I made initially in 2012. I said I would go to Washington and work in a bipartisan way to pass a farm bill. I helped not only pass that bill, I helped write it. And it's a bill that saved taxpayers $23 billion in mandatory spending. I said I was going to pass a long-term transportation bill, which is crucial. As you may hear throughout this debate, train whistles blowing behind us on the 3rd Street corridor. We've got to make sure that we have an ongoing project with the city, with the county, to ensure that high-speed rail and our rail traffic is converted to 3rd Street. These are the projects that I said I was going to work on. These are the things that I've accomplished, along with fixing our K-12 education program that was more of a top-down approach when it was No Child Left Behind. I'm happy to report that we made a bipartisan agreement to ensure that our local school districts.
Your time is up. Thank you. Candidates, thank you for those opening statements. Now the question and answer portion of the debate. We'll begin with my colleague, Bernard Schoenburg of the State Journal-Register.
Thank you. And my first question goes to Congressman Davis. The presidential race this year is, of course, interesting for you, Congressman Davis. Now that you have removed yourself from the list of Donald Trump backers, what do you tell Republicans worried about the next Supreme Court? The part for Mr. Wicklund will be, as a former Bernie Sanders supporter, how can you back Hillary Clinton, who made all those highly paid speeches to Wall Street firms? But Congressman Davis first.
Well, the Supreme Court's extremely important, and that's why we've got to keep the Supreme Court in Republican hands to ensure that any liberal justices that may be dominated by whomever is president are not confirmed, so that we are able to keep the court in the same split that we saw when Justice Scalia was there before he unfortunately passed. This has been a very difficult presidential race. It's been one that has not been nearly as civil as our debate, and it's one that I hope the American people don't have to see again.
Did you just say, by the way, just as a follow-up, anybody that Hillary Clinton puts forward that they should just reject if it doesn't?
No, not at all. I said what we should have is a check and balance in the Senate, which is why it's important to re-elect Mark Kirk and to have a Senate majority that is a Republican majority, so that we have that check and balance on whomever the president is and whomever they may nominate to that Supreme Court vacancy.
Mr. Wicklund?
You know, I think that we have a vacant Supreme Court seat sitting right now. It's been sitting for a while, and the lack of Senate to take up this issue when they have a very moderate candidate out there to discuss is shameful. It's we hear them talk about wanting to follow the Constitution, but here we sit minus a Supreme Court justice. Now, as relation to Hillary Clinton and her paid speeches to Wall Street and big money, is shameful. The amount of money that's given for these speeches is unbelievable, and how they can fathom taking that and then turn around and trying to rally and fight against what they're taking money from is just unacceptable, whether it's Wall Street, Big Pharma, or insurance. It's just one thing that needs to be changed, and we need to move on that and move on it fast. And I will hold Hillary Clinton responsible for her comments and her actions from the House. So we need to get Washington, D.C. back to work, and we need to make sure that the Senate and the House do their jobs.
But you are voting for her, correct?
Already did.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Candidates, our next question is about the Affordable Care Act, and new numbers out showing sharp increases in the premiums on the health insurance exchanges, raising questions about whether this is in fact affordable. There's been a lot of talk in Washington about repealing and replacing Obamacare. Not much has happened with that thus far. If you are in Congress in the next session, please talk specifically about what parts you would repeal or modify, and with what would you replace them to ensure access to coverage that is in fact affordable. And this question goes first to Mark Wicklund.
Well, the report's out, and it's all over the place today. And I think not only myself, but Rodney have both criticized the Affordable Care Act and the effects it's having on the residents, small and independent business owners and non-for-profits. We're luckily our non-for-profit I oversee, we're not looking at a 28% this year. The numbers come in for us at 8% increase. So it depends on where you fall at into that. Now, repealing it and starting over is always a bad mistake when you have a good foundation to start with. We need to look at adding a public option or transferring over to a single payer system. But we also need to rein in pharmaceutical. What also was hidden in that report was the increase in pharmaceuticals. And, that's one issue, whether it's EpiPens or cancer treatment or whatever, we need to rein in the funds for pharmaceuticals. You can't say it's not for profit.
Your time is up. Congressman Davis.
Well, it's no secret that I voted to repeal and replace Obamacare. As a matter of fact, we put a bill on the president's desk to do just that. But he vetoed it, and we didn't have enough Democrats in Congress to have the courage to override that veto with us. So we're still stuck with what we saw reported today, which are exponential increases in the cost of health insurance and a lack of choice. I mean, these are the things that I said I thought would happen when I was campaigning less than 4 years ago for this job. And now we're seeing it play out. We have got to make it a better system. I have done that by reforming Obamacare, by passing my Hire More Heroes Act, which encourages now small businesses to hire more of our veterans, something that we should encourage. And we're going to continue to work to make sure that we put a system in place. Go to see abetterway.gop, and you will see the plan that we are looking to replace Obamacare with and continue to cover things like pre-existing conditions.
So that people don't leave their radios and go to their computers right away, though, can you talk specifically about what parts of this law you would in fact repeal and with what you would replace it?
You're assuming, Jim, that people can't listen to their radio and also go to that website at the same time. I think they can. And I would encourage them to do that, because what they're going to see is they're going to see a market-based approach. They're going to see an approach that will actually live up to the promises that were made by President Obama to save families thousands of dollars a year, rather than broken promises and billion-dollar websites that we've seen out of Obamacare. And as we saw today, exponential increases in the cost of premiums. And look, I'm on Obamacare, Jim. By law, members of Congress are the only ones in this country who have to sign up for their health care under the Affordable Care Act. My deductibles went up, my premiums went up, and frankly, my out-of-pocket max went up. And that out-of-pocket max means something to me and many families in this country, because my wife fought cancer 17 years ago, and I hit it. Our family did. That's a number that many families are looking at, and it's unaffordable.
This goes to Congressman Davis. The Springfield Mass Transit District is considering cutbacks in service because of delayed state funding, and that's just a recent example of problems brought on by the state budget impasse. I know both of you are running for a federal office, but as a member of Congress for this area, can you do anything to help resolve that state budget impasse?
you know, what we were able to do in Washington is make sure that our federal share was coming to the states. That was part of our long-term transportation bill, the first long-term one that we've had in over a decade.
Right. And I'm talking in general about the impasse.
Well,
Yeah.
but you mentioned the Mass Transit
I did.
District, and I want to make sure I address that specific that we actually accomplished in Washington. I would hope that after this election, Republicans and Democrats in Springfield can come together like we did in Washington to pass our long-term transportation bill to actually help mass transit districts like Springfield and the many that I serve in this district. We're going to continue to work together and encourage our state legislators to do what they can to fix the problem so that no federal dollars that are coming to Illinois are in jeopardy of being lost.
Mr. Wicklund?
I think we all agree that with what's going on in the state of Illinois right now is shameful. It's a lack of leadership on both sides of the aisles. You know, I think as a leader in Washington, D.C., we should come back to our home state and our districts and push our state leaders to start doing their jobs and doing a better job. You know, we have all this federal pass-through money that comes through, and it gets held hostage in the state of Illinois that affects operations like mass transit, non-for-profits, Head Start, preschool. You know, the list is lengthy. But it gets held up here in Springfield, held hostage by the governor and Speaker Madigan, and they need to come together and work and realize the damage they're doing to the residents of this state that are leaving the state. We need residents to come back to the state of Illinois. We need to get our manufacturing up and going here. We have the best skilled labor in the country, hands down, and they're hurting right now. And you want to address a budget, let's get people back to work in the state. Let's get the 2,000 plus steel workers down there in Granite Steel up and working again and start providing back to the tax base.
Next question will go to Mark Wicklund. What changes do you want to see in U.S. immigration policy, and do you support the building of a wall on the U.S. southern border?
The wall subject, you know, today it's amazing. Donald Trump's talking about we're going to pay for this and then we're going to rebuild Mexico for it. So he's changed his tune on that. The wall's not going to make us any safer. It's a good talking point, and it stirs up conspiracy theorists and the whole lot. We need to address the visa program in this country, which has been so not only underfunded but unregulated for a long time, that affects great students and business owners and that are here in this country legally, that we need to make sure that the process is fair to them while maintaining the security of our country. And that's tightening down on those visas, working through those. We need to improve our security on the borders, whether it's the southern border or the northern border, with advanced electronic surveillance and whatever our Border Patrol agents need down there. They've said building the wall is not going to benefit them, and I stand behind what they said.
Congressman Davis on immigration.
I'm for making sure that we secure our borders, and that just doesn't mean at the southern border, Jim. It's in our airports, and that's where most illegal immigration happens in this country. It's individuals who come to this country on a visa, be it a travel visa, a student visa, et cetera, that come here and overstay. And the tragedy is that our administration doesn't enforce the laws that exist today. We had over 480,000 individuals just in the past year overstay their visas, and less than 20,000 were investigated. These are the types of problems that we need to solve in Washington if we're going to have a debate on immigration. It means fixing the systems we have. It means securing our border at all levels, not just on the northern and southern border, but within securing our border, it means securing our visa program. And when we can actually sit down and have a conversation about those things, that will be a breath of fresh air in Washington, because both sides have made this immigration debate.
Your time is up, but a quick follow-up. Do you in fact support the construction of a wall on the southern border?
If a wall was part of a plan, I would be in favor of it, be it a concrete steel wall or a virtual electronic surveillance program that we've had along the southern border already. And I already have.
Looks like the way things are going, you're stuck with me each time, Congressman, but we'll see how that goes. Anyway, to you, the United States has signed on to the so-called Paris Agreement to join with other countries in limiting carbon emissions and fighting climate change. What is your opinion of the U.S. being part of this agreement, and should more or less be done by our government concerning the global climate?
I'm very concerned about this agreement. I think it puts the United States at a disadvantage when we're trying to grow economically, we're trying to bring jobs back to our country. One of our best advantages is our access to cheap energy. And we have we need an all of the above energy approach. And we don't get enough credit in this country, Bernie, for what America has done to reduce our emissions in this country over the last 25 to 30 years. Look, I'm sitting in this congressional seat because of what I saw back in the early 90s when words on pieces of paper in Washington, D.C. changed the lives of many of the families that I grew up with in Christian County, when Peabody Mine Number 10, our largest employer, shut down because of changes to the Clean Air Act. We can burn coal. We can make sure we have baseload generating facilities like Clinton's nuclear facility, and we can do it in a way that's going to keep America competitive and also reduce our carbon footprint, and I'm going to continue to support those.
Mr. Wicklund?
Well, it's, the reports on that are out today also, and it shows us at our highest level all time and not looking to reverse that trend anytime soon. As for the Paris Agreement there, I think we need to be a part of these agreements, especially when it deals with a global issue like carbon and pollutants that are infecting the environment. Health issues, related to those, cancer and right on down the line, are in relationship to the pollutants that we're putting into our environment. We have great organizations, businesses here in the 13th District that have stepped up to meet the EPA requirements to rein in carbon and other harmful toxins. And we need to continue that, and we need to make it feasible for them to be able to meet those requirements that we put in place. We need to just keep working at what we're doing, and we need to look at agriculture on this also because of the dead zone we have in the Gulf that's feeding off the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, and has actually created the third largest dead zone.
And your time is up. Thank you. Next question will go first to Mark Wicklund, and it is on the issue of college affordability, a big concern for parents and students alike, particularly those taking on excessive loads of student debt. What steps would you take to ensure college affordability, and should the U.S. be moving toward a system of free tuition for 2- and/or 4-year colleges?
Well, we need to, this is a huge object to get this reined in. Democrats have helped create some of this problem, but we need to get public education back into public education. We have a lot of trade and skilled classes that were in the public education that have been moved into the community college setting. This extends education for those when they leave high school that, one, are unable to attain college, or two, unwilling to go to college. They need a viable source in the public education sector, in the high school sector, to get that, and that's skilled trades, electrical, plumbing, carpentry. Start on their vet schools at the public high school level. Our kids all did that when they were in high school and have moved on, and that was a big change right there. That moved a lot of things into the community college and public universities. We also need to rein in frivolous spending. Brian Byers released a study out of the University of Illinois that they wasted a ton of money on studies that are common sense.
And again, just to clarify, your thoughts on free tuition at 2- or 4-year colleges?
I'd like to see us, slide to a 2-year tuition on a community college level. Our public universities, they need to rein in their spending, and government needs to hold them accountable for excessive salaries and wasted spending.
Congressman Davis on college affordability.
Well, there's not enough time for me to address what we've done in a minute. Jim, you and I both have students at Illinois State University, so we understand the impact that college costs have on families at all levels. This is an issue that's very near and dear to me because of the district that I serve that has 4 public universities, 4 privates, and 8 community college districts that touch it. We have passed legislation that took Congress out of the business of setting student loan rates, interest rates, and frankly, instead of the 6.3 that would have been in existence today, we now see students and families taking advantage of historic low interest rates. I'm working with Treasurer Frericks to make the 529 programs better, to do things like buying computers, which students need, allowing families to save for that. And as you know, my Employer Participation in Student Loan Assistance Act will allow the creation of a program to allow employers to be incentivized to help pay back student loans in a tax-free way, just like they're able to do with tuition reimbursement.
Your time is up on 2- and 4-year tuition-free college?
Nothing's free. There's always going to be a cost associated with this. I was proud to work as part of the President's White House Ad Hoc Advisory Committee on community colleges. Unfortunately, the President disbanded it before we helped come up with a solution.
Thank you.
Next question, back at Congressman Davis. The federal minimum wage, it's lower than Illinois', but it's been $7.25 an hour since 2009. Should it be changed, and what level should it be?
Well, I will tell you, I've said I could be for an increase in the minimum wage if we have tax reform that's going to ensure that our small business owners, our job providers in this country are not hurt and hurt by things like Obamacare now and the increased costs that they've seen in health care. So I will tell you, the groups that come in and see me the most opposed to the minimum wage increase are our public universities. Remember, at our public universities, many students help supplement their college costs by working on campus. And in a day and age where we're seeing historic low investments from the state of Illinois into our public institutions, that cost will be burdened on the universities to increase that wage, and the result will be a loss of jobs for many students who are using that money to help pay for college.
Okay. And as a quick follow-up, you said with tax reform to help business, anything in particular that would, because it sounds like you're, with what the universities are talking about, not in favor of an increase right now.
The universities would have to be exempted, public institutions like that, unless they were given other incentives to help make up the cost. The last thing we should be doing right now when we have such high student loan debt is discouraging students from getting jobs on campuses and discouraging our campuses from hiring those students to do those jobs.
Mr. Wicklund.
Well, you know, we've been stagnant at, about $7.45 an hour right now as a federal
I thought
minimum
25,
wage.
but you might be right, yeah.
But, you know, you only see an increase on the state level if that federal level's increased. You know, so nudging that federal level up to incentivize the states and local districts to increase their minimum wage is the push forward that we need to see. You know, that was my concerns with the $15 minimum wage and who that was going to affect. A lot of people don't realize that that's going to affect seniors that are looking to offset their income for pharmaceuticals, students, high school and college students. They're just looking for extra cash to help them get through the college year. So we need to address those issues. And I think addressing the Affordable Care Act and the insurance problem, which weighs heavily on small business and large business, is going to be an incentive also to increase wages over a long term.
Okay, and I do think that you've said $12 an hour would be a good level. Is that for everyone, or would you like anyone exempted out of that?
Well, you know, we need to take into account those with disabilities and seniors, you know, because they're already on a fixed income to begin with. And they're just looking to be involved in their communities, to still be socially active and offset their prescriptions. I could see doing no harm to those with disabilities and seniors.
So a lower wage would be okay for some of those folks?
Yes.
Another major problem in this part of Illinois and around the country is the epidemic of opioid abuse, prescription painkillers. Can you explain what steps the federal government should take to combat this problem? And should federal law be relaxed to allow more use of medical marijuana for pain relief rather than prescription painkillers? First to Mark Wicklund.
You know, we've needed to move on medical marijuana or recreational marijuana for a long time. We've seen the burden this has put on our communities. Now, the marijuana doesn't relate to the heroin epidemic, which is plaguing our district. That's the opiate epidemic we have, and physicians and hospitals that have a tendency to just hand out narcotics at high levels. I've seen an increase of that. Living with chronic pain, I know how they handle those issues. They throw out pharmaceutical to deal with chronic pain. Personally, I don't take opiates. To me, there's no benefit to it. All I see is a downside to that. My wife deals with stenosis and arthritis in her spine that's bad, and she was on opiates, so I see how addiction can happen easily. Luckily, hers didn't get to that point. We were able to work through that and get some counseling, and you know, she's living life now without opiates. But that is a huge problem, and Rodney has pointed that out throughout the district, and we need to rein this in.
Your time is up, but just to clarify, you mentioned recreational use of marijuana. Would you like to see federal law change so that marijuana is no longer prohibited at the federal level?
I would like to see that law changed. It affects low income and minorities more than it does the rest of the population. And, we see states moving to recreational marijuana laws. We need to look on the federal side of how this is going to affect us down the road. More and more states are doing this on a yearly basis through elections of increasing recreational or medical marijuana, and the federal government's not keeping pace with this. The taxes off of what could be reined in on medical marijuana would offset a lot of programs. Law enforcement here recently has stepped up to notice some changes.
Congressman, if you could address the opiate abuse question, but also I'd like to get your thoughts on the marijuana issue as well. Sure.
No, we combined 18 Republican and Democrat bills together into an opioid package that we passed and has now been signed into law. Some of the solutions are as simple as providing liability protections for our first responders to administer Narcan to save an opioid overdose patient from dying. These are the types of issues that we're going to continue to address in a bipartisan way, because opioid abuse and opioid addiction is a true problem, not only in urban areas, but in rural areas, and it knows no socioeconomic boundaries. Just this past week, we had an opioid and heroin roundtable at Decatur Memorial Hospital, where we were joined by all facets of law enforcement, over 50 members of law enforcement, of the medical community, of the recovery community, sat down talking about possible solutions to the opioid epidemic. And we've got to continue to address it at all levels. And that's why I'm glad we were able to hear from those who were affected the most by it every single day just last week.
Should federal law be modified to allow increased use of marijuana, either for pain relief or just for recreational purposes, as Mr. Wicklund suggests?
I've been in favor of medical marijuana to be used as a substitute for opioids for pain relief. That's something I've clearly stated before. Recreational marijuana is legal in certain states, and we don't yet know what the outcome of that legalization is going to be. So Colorado, Washington, and is it Oregon? They're kind of the test scenarios to see if the tax revenue, like Mr. Wicklund talked about, is going to be as high as level as what was anticipated. But we're also going to be able to see the socioeconomic costs of recreational marijuana use in these states too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Gun violence continues to be a problem in our country. Would you want to see any changes in law concerning firearms, such as extending background checks to all gun shows or limiting the size of magazines?
Here's the biggest problem. When you look at some of the mass tragedies that we've seen in this country outside of terrorism, there's one nexus. That's mental health. We're trying to address that in Washington. Our only licensed clinical psychologist in Congress, Dr. Tim Murphy, helped craft a bill that we passed in the House of Representatives that allows medical professionals to engage an individual who's suffering from a mental illness before they get to a crisis stage. This bill passed in an overwhelming bipartisan manner and is sitting in the Senate right now. I would urge everybody watching and listening tonight to call our senators, tell them to pass that bill so we don't have to start over at the beginning of January. Criminals don't care if they have a FOID card, Bernie. Criminals don't care if they check the right box on an application. Every single proposal to limit access to our Second Amendment rights only affects law-abiding citizens and does not reduce crime.
And that includes gun shows, because there have been some stories people go to a gun show where they might not otherwise know how to, a kid who gets radicalized, for example.
I would say when you look at the statistics of crimes being committed, these are criminals who don't buy their firearms legally. And we have to make sure that we don't pass laws that only affect law-abiding citizens, because they deserve their Second Amendment right just like every other right that our Constitution gives them.
Mr. Wicklund?
Well, I do support either a national FOID card or something, but we do need to close big gun show loopholes, big time. There's a couple examples. The Orlando shooter down there, purchasing his weapons the way he did, he was legal to buy those. Why? Well, lack of upkeep by the FBI, not keeping him red flagged and keeping an eye on what was going on, and letting him slide back into society with the issues he had. Now, his were purchased legally. Could they have been stopped? Yes, if the FBI would have continued to do their job, kept him on a list for a while, red flagged, that possibly could have made a difference down there. Can't say 100%, but it could have made a difference. But we need to rein in, these gun shows. There has to be some common sense law to this. Just anybody going in off the street, taking a 3-hour drive from Decatur to Indianapolis to purchase whatever gun you want, we've got to bring that to an end.
Your time is up. This is live coverage of a candidate debate in the 13th U.S. House District. Incumbent Republican Rodney Davis, Democratic challenger Mark Wicklund, here on News Talk 94.7 and 970 WMAY Springfield, W234CC Sherman. Presented in conjunction with the State Journal-Register, we are live at the SJR offices in downtown Springfield. Our next question will go to Mark Wicklund. I want to turn now to some international issues, starting with the fight against ISIS in the Middle East. What is the best way for the U.S. to defeat the Islamic State group? And do you support the use of American forces on the ground as this fight progresses?
Well, use of American forces on the ground should always be a last option. We have combined forces in Iraq right now running ISIS out of Mosul. They're ahead of schedule, and ISIS is creating problems on their way out of the country. We need to get them moved back into Syria where we can keep an eye on them or get them round up before they get a chance to get back to Syria. We do need some sort of fly zone in Syria. We need to get the innocent people out of the way, but this is the same issue with our border securities and the internet and security systems we have in place, whether it's drones or that, to take these issues on ahead of time instead of waiting. We knew this problem was coming. We waited way too long to deal with it, and now we're in a situation, it's a quagmire, whether it's dealing with Aleppo and the residents there or Mosul. But we need to take ISIS serious, and we need to deal with them without ignoring the rest of the world.
Your time is up. Congressman Davis, your thoughts on the battle against ISIS?
This is a tragedy that we've seen unfold that I believe this administration failed miserably on addressing on the front end. When the president said that ISIS was the JV team and allowed them to march unimpeded across the deserts of Syria and northern Iraq and take territory to operate as a pseudo-nation state. The president could have done more, should have done more. We in Congress stood willing to give another authorization for use of military force because, frankly, Jim, there already are boots on the ground. But the president wanted us to hamstring himself, his own ability, compared to the authorization that was already in place. I'm not going to do that. If you're going to be commander-in-chief, do the job to make sure that lives are protected and American lives are protected and that we have our national security interests in mind. And that means putting together a force, utilizing our special forces, our air power with our allies in the region and create a coalition like they're doing with Mosul right now to run ISIS out and end this scourge in the Middle East forever.
Congressman, this goes to you. The United States allowed in about 12,500 Syrian refugees in the past year. Obviously, this comes from the turmoil in the Middle East. What is the right number? Some people say no refugees. Some people say you have to let in refugees as a caring nation. Where are you?
Well, what we have to do is address the crisis that's causing them to become refugees. As you know, I was in Europe in August and met with officials in Italy, and they talked about surveying many refugees in the refugee camps, and the majority, over 90%, want to go home. They want to be able to go back to their homeland.
Does that include people from Syria right now?
That does include people from Syria. And what I just mentioned before about the failure of this administration in working with our allies in the geographical area has caused this problem. We've got to have a better plan, a better way to address the problem in Syria and northern Iraq so that these refugees can go home.
Mr. Wicklund.
I have to agree. I have heard the same thing from Syrian refugees themselves, that they want to go home. Yeah, I think we really need to listen to them. This is their decision. Are we bringing them over here in hopes of keeping them here, or are we bringing them over here just till this ends? But we do need to address these issues before they get out of hand like they have in Aleppo. And, we got some issues playing out right now in Pakistan, with they're claiming ISIS. Pakistan's saying it's a foreign league of Al-Qaeda. But we need to take these issues serious before they get out of hand, and half of Aleppo's gone, and refugees are just scrambling to go anywhere. We need to look at some sort of camp facility or something like that and figure out who wants to go back, who wants to stay there and rebuild their country, and who seriously wants to move away. The majority of them want to stay at home. And as Americans, we'd want to too. We wouldn't want to be forced out of our country without the opportunity of returning home.
Thank you, candidates. The next question is about Cuba. The U.S. has been moving steadily toward opening up trade and tourism relations with Cuba. Should we continue in that direction? How much further? Or should we, in fact, return to the previous, more Cold War relationship we had with that communist nation? This question goes first to Mark Wicklund.
We need to continue our route with Cuba. This has been long overdue. This is a benefit to America. We get this done, and it's a huge benefit to the agriculture and manufacturing industry here in Illinois that funnels down through the Mississippi out into the Gulf and a short boat ride to Cuba. This needs to be resolved. We need to handle this properly. Cuba's not heading us back into the Cold War situation. Putin right now and what's happening in Russia and what's playing out on the presidential cycle has stirred this issue back up, with Russian ties. It's part of what's going on, and this is part of the web-based security we need to rein in hacking, which is the serious issue we have right now. Everybody wants to talk about the emails and all that other stuff. Why don't we deal with the serious issue, which is hacking by other countries and other organizations like WikiLeaks and those. It's shameful that we can't even rein that in, but we're talking about dealing with other global issues.
The question is about Cuba. Congressman Davis.
This is an area where the President and I have agreed. I do believe we need better relations and more economic activity between our countries. As a matter of fact, I traveled with my colleague Sherry Bustos and members of the Illinois agricultural community to Cuba in October of last year. It was the second time I visited, and a lot of things have changed. I share the goal of many who want to keep the embargo, and that's to get rid of the corrupt Castro regime. I just believe that the only way to do that is through trading with America's economic engine. Cuba's problem right now is they have a two-currency system. They have a government that controls every aspect of every Cuban life, and those individuals are given a payment for their work under one currency, a Cuban peso. The Cuban tourists, anybody who's from outside the country comes in, they have to use the Cuban tourist peso, and that is an overinflated currency that the government owns and that Americans pay a penalty to use. So until we get a combined currency, you're not going to be able to see the economic growth and economic freedoms that the Cuban people need to enjoy.
Time is up. Thank you.
Back at Congressman Davis. How much government surveillance of personal communications like cell phones and computers is okay with you in the name of national security?
Well, you guys are good on the time. Every time that stop one goes up, you look left right at the stop. So,
We're trying.
You must be monitoring me.
Trying to be like Coach Madden, manager.
Well, we've tried to make sure that we reformed our surveillance programs in Washington to ensure that Americans can feel comfortable that their privacy is not going to be violated. Frankly, I worked with the author of the Patriot Act, Jim Sensenbrenner, on making some common sense changes to our privacy laws in the specific sections so that we don't see the haystack grow so large that you will never find that needle that we're looking for. But we have to protect America's national security. We have to be able to work together and ensure that America has access to terrorist communication and terrorist activity outside our soil, and we need to do everything we can to make sure those programs exist for those who are not Americans wanting to hurt us.
Mr. Wicklund.
We do need a tough security system in here. Internet, phone, the whole 9 yards. Terrorist-driven. Americans and myself, I complain about big government keeping an eye on us all the time. Well, as Americans, we need to stop signing up for everything that every grocery store, every gas station, every credit card sends you something. You sign up on my email account and you get this, or you text this and you get that. You know, if we're truly worried about our own personal security and hacking of our own private email accounts and that starts at home. But we do need tough surveillance. You know, we need to thwart some of these crimes before they happen. You know, whether it's 9/11 or some of these other terrorist attacks that plague not just the United States, but around the world. It's communication driven, and it's electronic communication driven. But we also need to be smart and protect the citizens of America.
Mr. Wicklund, since you brought up the issue of hacking a couple of times now, I want to follow up on that, since intelligence agencies have indicated they believe the Russian government is behind attempts to hack into political organizations and individuals connected with that, perhaps as an attempt to influence American elections. We've also seen a massive cyber attack in recent days targeting a number of popular websites. If indeed these are the work of foreign governments, how should the U.S. respond, and what techniques should we use to try to stop and deter that in the future?
Well, you know, I think the evidence is pretty clear that majority of these are foreign driven, whether it's Russia or North Korea. You know, which amazes me in North Korea. They can barely keep the lights on for its residents, but they sure have one heck of an internet system that allows to reach over here to America and corrupt our system. But, you know, it's just an issue that we need to rein in. It shouldn't be that hard, and we made an attempt. Although we did not hear the outcome of what come off after the last Russian hack. But we have the technology and bright minds here in this country that should be able to stop this, prevent it before it happens, and hit them back. We have got to stand up for ourselves, and by allowing Russia to continue to interfere with our election process and within our government, we need to let them know that we're not going to tolerate that, whether it's an internet attack back at them or shutting them down. We have individuals here that can do that.
Congressman Davis?
Well, if we were in Washington, I'd be able to get a top secret briefing on what intelligence officials think actually happened. And I will do that when I go back to Washington, D.C. But what I've heard from my colleagues who serve on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees is that they do believe this was a nation state. Specifically, they believe that it could have been the country of Russia that did this. And I think we need to react accordingly. And it goes to the root problem of this administration's legacy of failure when it comes to foreign policy. We have to address issues with countries who are our adversaries and also don't respect us. And if we're going to continue to see nation states provide cybersecurity attacks like we've seen in these instances, America has to respond accordingly, and what that's going to be, I look forward to helping develop.
Can you say what you would prefer as an according response for this?
I don't yet know enough about the attacks, who's responsible, what type of attacks, to be able to develop that plan, but I look forward to going back to Washington and doing just that.
Thank you.
This is to Representative Davis. Representative, you recently told a few of us reporters downtown Springfield, and this was at a mass transit event, that you had never read the Republican Party platform. That platform, as you know, says, well, maybe you don't know if you haven't read it, but it supports you support federal funding for mass transit, but the GOP platform says it should be a local issue. In general, how strong would each of you say is your affiliation to your party, and in what ways do you think you differ from the party line?
Yeah, my affiliation to my party is very strong. You've known me for 20 years, Bernie, and I've been working to elect Republicans up and down the ballot, not knowing I'd have the opportunity to serve in Washington as a Republican. Proud to be a member of the Republican Party. Platforms are put together at conventions at the state and the national level all the time. Most Republicans or Democrats probably don't even know where to go to find it. It's unfortunate that a party platform would delve into such an issue that I believe should be solved at the local and the state level when it comes to transportation funding. Infrastructure and transportation is crucial to putting our men and women back to work and growing our economy, which is why you see bipartisan agreement in Washington and in Springfield to ensure that transportation issues are addressed.
Mr. Wicklund, in general, how strong is your affiliation to the Democratic Party, and how do you differ from the party line?
Well, I've been a Democrat all my life, so I thank my grandparents for that, and my best friend's parents who taught me politics and right from wrong. But we differ, and we do differ. Guns, for one, is a big one. I back the Second Amendment. Most of my party don't. But that depends on where you live at. And here in central Illinois, we're a little different than the Northeast and Northwest and southern states. But, we see those as our freedoms. So guns would be one, and party leadership is another one. I don't always back my party's platform that they put out or the leaders that they put out in front of us. Congressman Davis said that a vote against him would be a vote for Nancy Pelosi. I beg to differ with that. We've been there and seen that. It's time to move forward.
Are you saying you would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker?
I would not.
Because?
Because we need new leadership in Washington, D.C., and we need to quit hashing on the old leadership.
Thank you.
Earlier, we had a question about climate change. One of the ways the administration is attempting to deal with that is to put tighter regulations on the use of coal and coal-fired power plants. Do you support more regulation on the use of coal, and how do we strike a balance between the environment and the economy? First to Mark Wicklund.
Well, I support coal. I support a balanced energy effect. I personally would like to see us start dwindling down on our nuclear energy. That supplies a waste that we have to store for thousands of years. But there's ways to do that, to balance that out so that we're not producing as much uranium there to store. But, we need a balanced approach. And we also need a way for coal-fired plants to rein in EPA without heavy burdens or unfunded mandates on them. We need to address these issues seriously to reduce the CO levels and other harmful pollutants that are going into our atmosphere. We have some plants here in the 13th District that have met the requirements, but they're sitting idle right now for high sulfur coal that's burning in Missouri and Indiana, and something's wrong with that picture, that we cannot run clean burning coal plants because of the hindrances on them and the mandates on them.
Congressman Davis?
Well, I disagree with Mark. I support nuclear energy. As a matter of fact, I represent many people who work at the Clinton Nuclear Facility, where it is a baseload generating facility that provides access to cheap energy for every family in Illinois to turn their lights on and not pay a high price. And it has zero emissions. And I would urge anybody who doesn't favor nuclear energy, the clean baseload generating capacity that it provides, to go tour the facility in Clinton. And you'll see the small footprint, the very small footprint of nuclear waste stored in an Olympic-sized pool after 40 years of providing this waste. We need to make sure we keep Clinton's nuclear plant open, and I'm going to continue to do everything I can to work to have an all-of-the-above energy approach that includes coal, that includes nuclear, and that keeps our men and women who work at that facility, our IBEW workers, on the job and making sure we continue to fight for their jobs and their opportunities.
Okay, this goes to Representative Davis. If my numbers are correct, you had raised by midsummer more than $2 million this two-year election cycle, while Mr. Wicklund's fundraising at this point, I believe, is less than $50,000 in this race. Obviously, there's a lot of money in politics, and in some races, there's a giant disparity in spending and what is raised. Should anything be changed in the way money is raised and spent in political contests?
Well, Bernie, you've seen my race in 2012 be one of the most expensive in the nation, where $11 million came into this district from outside sources and the funds that my opponent and I raised. You saw a multi-million-dollar race last time. This gives us an opportunity to talk to the voters who support us and get our message out about what we've accomplished and also what we intend to do. So are there things that we can fix? Absolutely. But remember, we are limited to what we can raise at certain levels, that those donations have to be small donations to be able to get to the point where we're able to send our message out to the voters.
And just to follow up, would you like to limit any of the outside group spending that happens in so many races these days?
I could work together in a bipartisan way to ensure that we have some limits on spending. And that's where I think the biggest failure of McCain-Feingold was. It passed to get outside unreported dollars out of politics, and frankly, it's worse than what we had before.
Mr. Wicklund.
Well, we need campaign finance reform. We do see what's going on. When I entered this race, I had a goal in mind, and that was getting out back amongst the voters. We've relied so heavily on big dollars, big ads, big buys to get our message out there, and have forgot about the actual residents of the district. You can put the message out on TV all you want, but unless you're out there meeting people day after day, person after person, who get a feel for you by talking to you person to person, they're not going to get that on TV, and they're not going to get that from the radio. They get it from debates like this with civil discussion, and they get it from the person-to-person contact. And our governor is close to $50 million invested into state politics himself this election cycle. Him and others, I think this is a clear sign that, one, they're either skirting the tax law legally from the loopholes that are in it, or taxes need to go up on individuals like that.
Your time is up. The Obama administration has used its authority to require school districts around the country to protect the desires of transgender people to use the restrooms and locker room facilities of their choice. Should federal law continue in that direction in allowing people who are transgender to use the facilities that correspond to their gender identity, or should they, in fact, allow districts locally to be able to require those individuals to use the facilities for the gender at their birth? That goes first to Mark Wicklund.
Well, the bathroom question, I was hoping would wear itself out sooner or later, but, it was just the other day that I literally had to use a women's restroom. And I've had to do that 3 times in the last month. Most students shy away from using the restroom. I don't know about you, but I wasn't a big fan of using the public restroom at my high school. It smelled bad, and you didn't want to be stuck in there. But transgender issues are serious. How we go about addressing those, is a touchy situation. It fires up both sides of the debate. My answer has always been, if that's the issue, turn one of your bathrooms into a multi-generation while remaining to have a male and female restroom. But that's an option. And when we're looking down the road and building new schools or public facilities like that, you see public facilities now that are multi-gender facilities that you use in there. So I think we need to be responsible.
Your time's up, but if I don't mind my asking, why did you have to use a women's restroom?
Well, it seems to be frequent at a gas station in Raymond that I've utilized for 30 years now. It never seems to fail that when I come back through there about 9 o'clock, it seems to be the same gentleman in the men's bathroom.
I think I understand.
And the
Thank
gal
you.
at the register goes, he's going to be there for a while. Go ahead and use the women's. But, they're closed down every now and then at sporting events I've had to, too.
Congressman Davis?
Interesting discussion, and I believe this is an issue that should be solved at the state and local level. As a matter of fact, I opened my local newspaper in Taylorville tonight to see that the local park district is going to put in a unisex bathroom that can help families also to, with children who may be of the opposite sex to change, to use those facilities. That's nothing new. I'm not somebody who supports a top-down approach to decisions like this. And frankly, the president trying to punish states like North Carolina by withholding federal education dollars, I think is a tragedy. And those are the states' rights issues that we're going to continue to address, because if the Taylorville Park District can solve this problem, we can solve this problem at the local and state level a lot better than bureaucrats in concrete buildings in Washington, D.C.
This goes to Congressman Davis, and we're getting near the end, but just because we like people to know who these candidates are, what is your favorite television show, current or classic, and why?
Boy, can I get a pass?
You don't watch television?
I watch a lot of the NFL Network and the MLB Network, so I would have to say that A Football Life is my favorite show that I watch, and especially when I get some vintage Oakland Raiders on there to be able to see those programs. And I'm just a big sports fan. I'm a big sport, MLB and NFL fan.
And how did you become a Raiders fan?
First game I ever watched was Super Bowl 11, January 9th, 1977. The Raiders beat the Vikings 32-14 in the Super Bowl. Been a fan ever since. Anybody that grew up with me knew that I was an Oakland Raiders fan when it came to the NFL, and still am, and they're having a great year.
Mr. Wicklund, favorite television show?
Well, I got to get this one in for Drew first. At least they didn't ask you what your favorite song was, and we didn't have to hear a new one, so I'm assuming it's still Higher by Creed.
Well, that's one of my good songs, but I got a lot of others since then, too.
Well, I watch a lot of news. I like to stay up to date, but as far as TV shows, my son and I are big Walking Dead fans. It's the one thing that him and I enjoy on Sunday evening by ourselves. So that's one we watch every week. Outside of that, I'm a big fan of the NCIS series.
And how angry were you this past Sunday? Never mind, we can save that for another time. Candidates, it is time for our closing statements now, and again, by mutual agreement, we will stick with the same order as for opening statements, so the first 90-second closing statement goes to Mark Wicklund.
Well, I think that changed. I thought they were going to give you the closing here.
We were told by your staff that you would prefer to go first.
If
you'd like to change that, Congressman, whatever you're...
I took the opening statement. We were under agreement
I'll
that
take the
that
opening.
my
Very
opponent
good.
would have
Fine,
this one.
I'm good. Look, as you can tell, my opponent and I have offered an opportunity for the voters of this district to see what a civil debate looks like and to talk about the issues that we agree on and the issues we disagree on. My opponent and I were able to address many issues tonight, but there are many others that we still have yet to address in Washington, D.C., which is why I'm asking the voters to send me back. We've got to do more to fund medical research. We passed a bill called the 21st Century Cures Act that will change the way that medical research is funded in this country and put billions of more dollars while cutting mandatory spending elsewhere, putting billions of research dollars into our research facilities to find cures for diseases like Alzheimer's. We have to do this because in a decade, if we don't find a cure for Alzheimer's, it could break Medicare as we know it, just that one disease. I met friends like Steve Rockford from Central Illinois, from Springfield, throughout my time in Washington, and to see the courage that he has every day to fight ALS. And Johnny Wade, an 8-year-old pediatric cancer patient that didn't survive. He's my inspiration as to why we need to make sure that we fund pediatric cancer research more than the 4% that it is. These are some issues, along with addressing many others that don't get talked about in Washington, D.C. and didn't get addressed here. Those are the fights that I'm going to continue to wage in Washington, D.C. when I get reelected.
And the final closing statement to Mark Wicklund.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Rodney, for allowing us to continue to keep this civil, and I think that's a bonus to the residents of the 13th District, and hopefully other politicians are paying attention out there. We'll see. We've seen the last 4 years, or the last 8 years that Obama's been in office, we've seen a House and a Senate that was set on obstructing whatever the president put out there. Instead of trying to go in and fix issues, serious issues that are plaguing our country, we have seen repeals, obstruction, everything but trying to fix what's wrong with our country. And it's not what we're hearing play out on the national media every day. Americans need to stop and take a breath and realize that this election will be over in 14 days. We have to get back as citizens, neighbors, friends, and family to working with each other, living with each other civilly, like the last 2 debates we've had here. Whether our differences or we agree, government needs to get back to work for the people. And we've gotten out of that issue by electing hand-picked candidates and our party leader hand-picked candidates. We need to get back to representation of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we have that opportunity here in the 13th District to stand up and change what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Candidates, thank you both. Congressman Rodney Davis, challenger Mark Wicklund. How about a hand for our candidates this evening? We appreciate your time. A reminder, we will have one more debate in the U.S. Senate race between Republican incumbent Mark Kirk and Democrat Tammy Duckworth. That will be Thursday evening, 7 p.m. at Sangamon Auditorium at UIS. Please tune in. And, of course, this event will be archived at sj-r.com and at wmay.com. For my colleague Bernie Schoenberg at the State Journal-Register, I'm Jim Leach, News Talk 94.7 and 970 WMAY. Good evening.
Thanks, dude.